I love, we did this a couple of few weeks ago. I don't think it was the last time we chatted, but maybe the time before, where we honed in on a particular instrument. We talked about, I think, live bass or something like that. I want to maybe do some more of that and just kind of free form on a certain thing, and on a certain instrument, a certain element of production, mixing, whatever, a certain instrument. Kenneth asked the question, which I struggle with this one, mostly because I don't do it very much, and because the recordings can be all over the place. But Kenneth asked us to talk about mixing orchestral instruments, strings, cello, horns, etc. Great. I can talk about it from the production aspect, which is that there is a wide spectrum of quality and styles that are possible. I mean, I've certainly done proper live string sessions at proper studios with proper orchestration and, many players, union players in the room. And then I've done lots and lots of programming myself. And to get a great 2-track or stemmed orchestra recording from a proper studio is dramatically different from basically every other situation. And I find it often very challenging to get things to sound great that aren't actually properly recorded. I mean, if you're going for that sound. So again, with all this, like I talked with Matt Beckley a couple of weeks ago about guitars, it's one thing to try to get the best acoustic guitar sound with a great mic and a thing, but also guitar is now almost used like a sample in many recordings. So you're not trying to go for a pristine guitar sound necessarily. And I think the same is certainly the case with orchestral things, where whether you're getting a Mellotron lo-fi thing or you're getting it, treating it as a sample or whatever, there's a wide spectrum to what you're trying to accomplish. So I don't know if you want to break down any of those. We can go pretty deep on this. I always struggle with this. I always find I can't get the mid-range to speak quite right. The high end, I always am trying to add lots of silky high end, because when I get a great orchestral recording, it already has that sort of air built into it. And it's hard to manufacture that of people in a room and ribbon mics and the noise that comes with that. So I find it very challenging. I'd love you to just riff on a little bit.
Yeah, there's a bunch of ways in, because I'm biased to the I actually really completely respect and agree with the guitar conversation that you were just mentioning, and I didn't tune in, but guitars just have a different different value right now in records. And every once in a while, you're going to get the Ed Sheeran where like the guitar is driving the song. Yeah. That's what it is. Like the Without You record I mixed for Kid Leroy. Like there are going to be records like that. Yeah. That's not the mainstay. Yeah, it's a wide section. With strings, I'm biased because I have one of my best friends is an incredibly talented string arranger and very successful, Rob Moose. And Rob, there's nothing like the emotion that someone like Rob or Daniel Lupi or Nick Britell can like give you from an arrangement that is also properly recorded, like with the overtones and the way it's presented in a room. It's a little bit more realistic in a sense that we kind of know what that is supposed to feel like and sound like inherently in our bodies. Like sharing space with an orchestra is something that I guess is almost oh man, it's so rootsy. Like a guitar around a campfire is another version of this. Like there's something about capturing the acoustic guitar with space that will always give you a certain nostalgic feeling. There's a very strong similarity, historically speaking, to that. So I'm going to be biased towards that. The other way to think about it is also a sample and then just put a phaser on it and make it all trippy and weird. Like you can do that with it, but again, it's back to our whole thing. It's like, what's the intention of what we're going for? So if you want a string section on a record, Rob does all the strings for Phoebe Bridgers, right? When you hear strings on Phoebe Bridgers, they're not manipulated. That is Rob performing, recording, mostly himself in his own space with maybe some additions and overdubs, working with Blake Mills, the same thing. It's just like very emotionally compelling storytelling through harmony that would not give you the same impact being recorded improperly, one, or two, using a sample. There are, I would say, like Hans Zimmer is known for, and same with Nick Britell, stacking samples on top of live for a certain density that you can't achieve. If you were to overcompress to get that, like the Succession theme song, for example, Nick Britell, there's so many samples and compressed sounds in that record, and that intensity is kind of formed by the compression. If you overcompress an orchestra to that desired amount, you get way too much room and space, and it'd be pumping, and it would feel so weird. So there's something to say about the combination of the two as well, right? So there's now the middle ground. There's a third place to discuss this. I think straight up only organic capture in the room is a very specific thing. Straight up sample-based strings is also another thing. Kind of sounds cheap. And then the mixture of the two, the hybrid, seems to be where the industry is going in film, for example.
Yeah.
Now I would now turn and look at a good friend, Noah Schneider, who's Danny Elfman's engineer, and ask him to talk on this more. I guess this is what he does every day of his life with Danny Elfman. And, the way he considers miking an orchestra and the technique there, and how there's very little mixing to do, right? I saw him mix The Grinch for Netflix like a few years back. And mixing for him is like, is riding moves. There's no real EQs. He's capturing it the way that everyone's intended. And there's a team of people in the room that have already agreed on this. They're not like, hey, can you take out some of that high mids and the strings? It's like, no, we captured that because it sounded right with the microphones in capital A or whatever, wherever they did it, right? So there's so many ways to go into this conversation. I think it's about what you're going for and the intention. And the most compelling experience that is historically felt by our bodies is probably the original, the far left of the captured well in a room with an orchestra with very minimal overdubs. We're all going to feel something from that. And then there's the spectrum to the other side, a full sample that is existing now. I think it's very hard for a string player or a producer that is hiring a string arranger to beat the sound, psychologically speaking, of a sample-based string patch. Because it's so unrealistic, most of them, if not all of them. And the ones that are realistic, you got to spend months even understanding the interface on how the velocities work and
all the articulations and everything.
All the articulations and the miking of it, where there's bleed. Like, you're not going to only have violas in the viola mic. You're going to get bleed from the upright bass. You're not going to. It's not going to be, and that's part of it. That's part of the glue of the sound. So I'm sure there's crossover in those. I haven't gone deep into them in a long time. I used to when I was producing more, but it never felt realistic. And again, I'm privileged to have access to like knowing some of the best in the business of what they do here. I imagine being in a John Williams recording session, that dude is not overdubbing. It is arranged for the London Symphony or the LA Symphony, and it is captured accordingly. And again, the other extreme is Hans Zimmer. He mocks it all up with sample based apparently, and then goes and records on top of, and then leaves that compressed density to it. And there's high energy there. When you listen to one of Hans Zimmer's soundtracks, like say in AirPods or headphones, like there's this pop density to the top end that is almost fatiguing. That if you were in a movie theater, like you may be fatigued and hurt by it to some degree, depending on how loud it is, versus the kind of in and out of a John Williams score of like, all right, it's just kind of tremoloing here, and then like a big impact happens, and those seem to be a little bit more dynamic to me than a Hans Zimmer soundtrack. None of which are better or worse. It's just a stylistic choice.
Yeah, the interesting thing I think about Hans Zimmer is that he's been so keyboard heavy and synth heavy, and even if it's analog synthesis, it's still a much more perfect tone compared to somebody playing an instrument. I think the big challenge with
that's a big part.
Yeah, the big challenge with getting strings to sound great is how do you get the human element in there? I mean, we've talked about this a bit with vocals and background vocals, and we talked about it a couple weeks ago with using different mics for the same singer, different distances, different chains. Essentially what you're getting with a real string performance is a whole bunch of slightly different personalities and muscles and,
intonation,
like coordination system. So it's like every person has their own, even though they're all super well trained, if you're getting a real string section, everybody brings a slightly different intonation, timing, intensity, velocity, arc to their velocity. And all of those things add up to something that feels richer. I mean, the concept of chorus as an effect is slight detuning, slight delay, those sort of things, which you're trying to mimic what people do in an actual chorus of vocals or an orchestra, where everybody's going to have slightly different timbre, slightly different timing, slightly different volume, slightly different head positions, like all those things add up to a much richer sound. So figuring out how to do that with strings seems to me, as on the production end, always the thing that I'm trying to accomplish. Even when I've done live string sessions, I will try to add sample library strings as well, just so I can get more variety in the sound and see what it sounds like. I think for people who are trying on the production end, on a budget, I've often had my one friend who plays a violin just add on top of what you're doing. And that makes a huge difference, just having a person, having the human touch in there. If you're not an amazing orchestrator, arranger, and whatnot. Although, my friend Dave Rosen, who I think you've met, who's in the band The Parlor Mob and is now doing trailer music, has done Star Wars and a bunch of other film trailers. I mean, the depth to which, and many people watching this will know this, and you know this, the depth to which you can go in on some of these sample libraries with articulations and techniques are really amazing, but you're still having to program it in. It still doesn't have the human performed feel. And so that's the thing on the recording end that I find most challenging.
Thanks for watching. Just a reminder, all of this content is free. There's no secret knowledge here. There's no Patreon. We don't read ads. We don't have sponsors. We're just trying to build a knowledge base. All that we ask in return is that you share it with somebody. Thanks so much.